Well, hello there, 7th grade, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Washington State History. As I said in the email, we are skipping around a little bit because we don't have that much time left, so we got to cover the very essential things of Washington State history. Of course, one of the most essential things in that is how does Washington become a state? So today, we're going to leave Chapter 5 behind and head over to Chapter 6. We're not going to start right at the start of chapter 6, so if you look in your textbook, you might not see the information at the start of that chapter reflected in what we're going to talk about today, but you know what? That's okay. All this section is interested in looking at is how did we go from being a part of Oregon country first, I should say, to then being a territory and a state. And also, what is the difference between those two things? So let's dive right into it. As always, I do want you taking notes during this video. If you take really detailed notes, ladies and gentlemen, when you go back and do the homework, it's really going to help you. You might not have to rewatch this video. Also, it's just going to help you remember the information for the inevitable test that's going to be on this. So here we go. There are three essential questions that we are going to try to answer by the end of chapter 6. All right? That first question is this, and I would like you to write these questions down because these questions could be great review for you folks. So, how did Washington's borders change as it switched from territory to statehood? Okay, spoiler alert, our borders did not always look like how they look like today. They changed a lot. It took many different treaties. It almost took a war with Canada. Excuse me, not Canada. It almost took a war with England. Okay, our borders changed a lot. We're gonna want to see how exactly they did it. So you should be able to tell the narrative. I should be able to ask you, hey, from Washington being a part of Oregon country to being a state, be specific. How did the borders change? What were the treaties involved? Okay, you should be able to answer that. Which brings me to number 2. What legal treaties were involved in the territory and state lands, right? So legal treaties mostly are about borders changing, like the United States signs this legal treaty with England saying this is the border, okay? And also, how did this affect the inhabitants of Washington at this time? That would include early American pioneers, early workers over there, the Native American groups, etc., etc. All right? So these first two questions are kind of linked together. How did the borders of Washington change to get to where they are today? What legal treaties were involved in that process? And this one's more the human side of history, okay? How does this affect people living in the state? So if you did not write these three questions down, I would pause the video right now and do it because I'm going to move on. And again, these view these as review questions. By the end of this series of lessons, you should be able to answer these questions in great detail. These could also be great, maybe possible essay or test questions, for example. So you're really going to want to make sure you know this. Okay, I'm moving right along. What are the borders between Canada? And when I say Canada at this time, folks, I'm talking about Canada slash England, right? Because they are one in the same, right? Technically it's England, but it's going to become Canada. So let's go back in time, all right? What are the existing borders? Well, you know this already. This right here, ladies and gentlemen, this is Oregon country. And this land right here, that's in yellow, is jointly occupied by the United States and by England, which would one day become Canada. So this is where we left off. You've seen this before in past lessons, right? Here's the Oregon Trail, and right now we both share this land, which is kind of cool because at one brief time, the United States did technically have a claim to this land up here, which is now British Columbia. We got rid of that eventually, but this is where we're starting from. So right now, the journey begins here. These are the borders of Oregon country. Because remember, we're going from Oregon country, because Washington's a part of Oregon country. It says Oregon country right here. So we're going to go from Oregon country to Oregon territory to Washington territory to Washington state. And as you can see, the border on the west is the ocean, okay? The border on the east is the Continental Divide, which is essentially the Rocky Mountains. The northern border is the 5440 parallel line. You might remember parallel lines from 6th grade geography. And the border at the south is the 42nd parallel line. So a huge swath of land. Alrighty, let us move on. Now, here's the thing. Both countries did own this land and share it, but as we've talked about before, this is going to be a slight review, all right? Both countries wanted to own it. And I'm going to go a little quicker during this part because we've mentioned this before. Now, remember, you might remember James Polk. In 1844, James Polk became the brand new president. Remember him? He's our Manifest Destiny president. He believes it's the destiny and the duty of Americans to spread west, spread American democracy, spread Christianity, to settle these lands. That's what he wants. That's his presidential platform. Specifically, in the Northwest, he wants to end the joint English U.S. occupation of Oregon Territory, right? Or Oregon Country. That's what he wants to do. Now, keep in mind, Polk is a huge expansionist. He's going to start the Mexican-American War in the South to get Texas, California, all that land. This is his plan for Washington area. This is his secret plan. Now, President Polk wants the border to be at the 50-40 parallel line. Remember, folks, these are parallel lines. Those are the lines that go across the globe horizontally from the North Pole to the South Pole. They are parallel with each other, meaning that they never, ever touch. All right? So that's what he wants the border to be. And that line, if you remember from the last picture, that is very, very, very far north. It is not the border we have today. But you might recall from lessons in the past, this is one of his campaign slogans. The campaign slogan was 54-40 or fight, meaning let's get this border with Canada, excuse me, this border with England, and we're willing to fight for it if we don't, all right? Now, England, on the other hand, wants the border to be the Columbia River, all right? What could this potentially mean for Washington? Now think about it. This is when I would normally ask a question, ask you to turn and talk, but what if England got England's way and the border between the United States and England, which is now Canada, would be the Columbia River? Well, that would essentially mean there would be no Washington state because our Washington current border with the state below us, Oregon, is in fact the Columbia River. So if England gets her way, there essentially is no Washington state, there's just Oregon. However, if President Polk gets his way, and if this is going to be the border, the 5440 line, then there's really going to be no British Columbia, which is, of course, the Canadian territory right above us. All that land would be Washington, right? So if Polk gets his way, right, here's Washington, right? This looks kind of like Washington, the Puget Sound. Well, normally I'd stop here, but if Polk got his way, he'd get all of this land up here, and Washington would look like it had a really kind of funny hat on, all right? So that's if Polk gets his way. However, let me get rid of this. If England got her way, it would start up here at the 5440, go down. All right, here's where Washington hits. Well, it would essentially look like the same thing, except it would all be England. Obviously, it's not what it looks like today. Here's our border with Canada. But again, what these countries are doing, folks, is negotiating. And when you negotiate something, you want to overshoot it, right? Polk probably knew deep down in his heart he was never going to get this border. It was way too far north. And England knew that they were most likely never going to get this border. The Columbia River was way too far south. But they knew they were going to have to negotiate. And when you're negotiating, you always want to come with a higher offer, all right? Something well above what you think you're actually going to get, because in negotiations, you usually have to have a compromise, which means your price gets talked down a little bit. So if you look at our current border, right, drawing a map here of Washington states, all right, this is the current border, that's Washington, just go with it, right? Polk wanted the border here, England wanted the border here, where this was the actual border. Well, that kind of makes sense because that is kind of in the middle. That's the compromise. So Polk got talked down from here to here, and England got talked down from here to here. All right, it's a great negotiation tactic. They are overshooting so they each get their way. Okay, now here's the issue though. There's this English company called the Hudson Bay Company. It's very famous and it's very profitable. They make a lot of money in this area. They deal in fur trading, in timber, a whole bunch of stuff. All right, they're like the Amazon of the time. And they have lots of property in what is present day Washington, right? That's a huge issue. Now remember, folks, we've talked about how countries have different claims to an area. And part of that claim is how many people live there. Now, let's go here. So here's Washington again. All right, I'm not getting any better at drawing Washington. All right, here's Washington. We're here. Okay. So England has lots of property in this area. We'll just go ahead and draw on Vancouver Island for good measure, and you'll see why in a second. So the green, say the Hudson Bay Company, it's down here, it's right here. They got stuff here in the Columbia River. Yes, Washington has a lot of settlers there and some business, but England has greater business interests. I don't have a bullet point for that. I would just write it down. England has greater business interests in Washington because the Hudson Bay Company has so much land in this area, and that means money. So England is going to James Polk and saying, "Jolly-o, President Polk, as you can see, we have quite a bit of land in the Hudson Bay Company in the Washington area. Therefore, we have a stronger claim to the region because we, as you see, make lots of money there with our company. Now, therefore, all this land should be ours and the border should be the Columbia River." I gotta say, folks, I normally do a much better English accent. I don't know what that was all about, but we gotta move on. Okay, so that's what England's saying. England's saying, sweet, in these negotiations, we have all this land in Washington from a company, so we're gonna be pretty good. Okay, now, another part of that issue is that the Hudson Bay Company is also gonna move their headquarters to Fort Victoria. And Fort Victoria is what is known as today as Victoria City, which is on the southern tip of Vancouver Island. Maybe some of you have been there. It's a short clipper ride away. Now here's the thing. This strengthens England's claims to the area. Okay? It really strengthens England's claims. And this does not sit well with President Polk. Now think about it this way, right? The Columbia Bay Company, again, I'm going back to, all right, here's all of Oregon Territory, right? So there's Washington. It keeps getting worse. And it goes way up here, all right, to the shared map. Here's, okay. So say the Hudson Bay Company's capital was moved from here down to here. England's doing that on purpose. They're moving the capital of their company down there to strengthen their lands to try to get this area because they already have Hudson Bay Company land in other places in Washington. So this is the issue. And remember, folks, they're both overshooting. So what is going to happen? I'm going to give you a warning. I'm going to move on. So if you want to pause the video to finish taking notes, make sure to do that. And if not, let's move on. Well, let's look at this map again. All right, this is the same map I showed you at the start of the lesson, and I'm doing this to highlight things. Here's the 5440 line, right? This is where President Polk wanted the border to be. That means that all of this would be considered Washington State, which would be pretty cool. We get a bunch of land. And down here is the Columbia River. All right, this is where England wanted the border to be. And remember, England moves the Hudson Bay Company down here, which is going to strengthen their claim, and they own lots of land. So, how does this get resolved? Well, it's going to be this right here, the Treaty of 1846, one of the most important treaties in all of Washington's state history. And this is going to set the new borders for Washington State at the 49th parallel line. All right? It's not the 5440 line, so Polk didn't quite get what he wanted, but it's also not the Columbia River, so England didn't quite get what they wanted. Again, it's a compromise. So here are the new borders. The 49th parallel from the Rocky Mountains, this would be the Rocky Mountains in the east, right, to the water channel separating Vancouver Island from the mainland. All right, these are the new borders. These are the new specific borders. The 49th parallel, but remember, the 49th parallel, that's just the northern border. The eastern border is going to be the Rocky Mountains, and the western border is going to be this little water channel here, which separates Vancouver Island from the mainland. And this is cool because the 49th parallel, that is our current border with the nation of Canada, right? So we're starting to get that answers to the question of how does Washington State end up with the current borders that it has? Well, the first answer to that question is the Treaty of 1846. That's how we got our northern border right here. Now, for this to happen, the U.S. would pay the Hudson Bay Company for lost property. Essentially, we bought the English Empire out. We said, listen, England, President Polk's going to say, look here, England, we know you have a lot of land south of that, and we know you want something for that. We're not just going to take it. We're not being unreasonable. That's not how Polk was treating the Mexicans, by the way, but he was a little more cautious with the English because the English had a very strong empire and could easily destroy the United States. So Polk says, we're going to buy you out. So we bought lots of land that the Hudson Bay Company owned in Washington State, but not all of it. And we also allowed the Hudson Bay Company to still travel. All right? They could still use travelways and water transportation in the United States. So we bought out some of the Hudson Bay Company's land, gave that money to England, and we still let the remaining land that was owned by the Hudson Bay Company, we said, English people, you can travel freely through here. It's cool. So this is a pretty good treaty. Let's look at this map here. All right. Now this map shows what used to be Oregon country. All of this used to be Oregon country. Okay, very nice. And it highlights the Treaty of 1846. And if you look, here is the 49th parallel, right? As it says right here. Hold on a second. Let me clear things up really quick. Okay. Great. Now all of this used to be Oregon country, but it's no longer because the new border right here is the 49th parallel. 49th parallel, there it is, and it goes right here, which is our present day border. Now, as you see, the other part of this, the Rocky Mountains is the border. That's going to be over here, all right, the Rocky Mountains, all right, and then the next part of the border on the west, the water channel separating Vancouver Island from the mainland, that is this area right here. That's the water channel. So this is our new border. Very nice. Now, what this means is that England no longer has a claim to this part of the land. We used to jointly occupy that, but they no longer do that. This is all the United States of America right here. Well, it's not states yet. It's just all American land. England is now only has a claim to this land. So both sides gained things and lost things. For example, the United States, we lost this land. Remember, this is what Polk wanted. He originally wanted this to be the border between the 5440. So in this thing, we gave up all claims to this land, okay? So that's too bad, but at the same point, England lost all of this land, all right? England gave up all claims to this land, all right? So both sides lost something in that sense, but it became firmer because realistically, it's difficult to share territories. So this is the new border. It's going to be right here, the Treaty of 1846. All right, folks, we're starting to answer that question. How do we get our modern borders? Or this is one part of that. So obviously, feel free to watch this video as many times as you need to. There is going to be a homework assignment posted to teams. Best of luck on that. And remember, folks, be as detailed as possible when you're doing this. Okay, don't lose points for lack of detail. I will talk to you later. If I can get out of here. All right, see you later, everyone.